Good evening, everyone. My name is Brooke Pear, and I'm the Financial Aid Counselor for Pinellas County School District. I work with students and families in the school district regarding scholarships such as the Bright Futures program as well as other financial aid. Tonight I will be discussing the free application for federal student aid, otherwise known as the FAFSA, with my colleagues Kaylee Forbes with the school district and Alice Marks with St. Pete College. Since you decided to tune in tonight, I'm guessing that you've heard something about the FAFSA, but you aren't sure if it's something that you should be completing. I hope by the end of the night you realize that any student planning on continuing their education after high school who wants assistance with financial aid should complete the FAFSA. I do want to let you know that if you tuned into our FAFSA event in December, that this is the same presentation that we'll be covering this evening. I also want everyone to know that there is a recording of this session and that it will be available on our website, www.pcsb.org/FAFSA, so pcsb.org/FAFSA. Before we begin, I want Alice and Kaylee to introduce themselves. Kaylee, you want to start?
Hi, thank you. I'm Kaylee Forbes, and I'm a school counselor at Bogosiega High School.
Thank you, Kaylee. Now to you, Alice.
Hi, I'm Alice Marks. I'm Assistant Director of Financial Aid at the Clearwater campus of St. Petersburg College, and I also work with student employment college-wide. So if anyone's interested in student employment, they'll want to reach out to me.
Great. Thanks, Alice and Kaylee, for being with me tonight. I know it's our hope to ensure our students, parents, and families have all the information they need to get the financial aid process for the class of 2021. So let's get started. First off, we're going to do just a brief presentation of about 15 minutes to go over some of the basics of what the FAFSA is, who should complete it, and some general requirements. As we're going through the presentation, please submit your questions in the chat box and we will get to them afterwards. So we're ready to begin with the free application for federal student aid. So what is the FAFSA? The FAFSA is a form you need to complete to get financial assistance from the government to help pay for college. Submitting a FAFSA is the most important thing you can do if you want financial aid. And the FAFSA is free. Alice is going to cover some information about scams, but that's one important thing to keep in mind, that this is a free document to fill out. The FAFSA must be completed annually, and it opens October 1st each year. To ensure that you get the most money as possible, you should complete it as soon as you can once it opens. Additionally, you'll want to check with the school you plan to attend to find out if they have priority deadlines. By completing the FAFSA, you may be eligible to get grants, work study, and student loans. Additionally, some college and state-based grants and scholarships also require the FAFSA. So when you're ready, you will go to FAFSA.gov, FAFSA.gov. So who should complete the FAFSA? Essentially, anyone who's planning on continuing their education after high school, whether that's at a community college, a technical education program such as Pinellas Technical College, a trade school, a state college such as SPC, or a university such as the University of South Florida. There are some basic eligibility requirements that I want to go over. First, the student must be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen and have a Social Security number. Please note that this applies to the student, but it does not apply to the parent. The student must have a high school diploma or an equivalency, such as a GED. They must enroll in an eligible degree or certificate program. So there are a few programs out there that are not eligible for financial aid, and you'll want to check with your institution regarding that. Males must be registered with the Selective Service if they're over 18 years of old. If you haven't registered, if you're a male and you haven't registered when you're completing the FAFSA, there will be a part that'll link you to the form to do so. If a student has a drug conviction, it may affect their eligibility. So I hope that gives you an idea of what FAFSA is, and now I'm going to turn things over to Kaylee, who's going to cover some of the specific information you need to complete the FAFSA. Kaylee?
Thanks, Brooke. The first thing to consider when you're getting ready to do the FAFSA is whether or not you are going to be classified as a dependent student or an independent student. In most cases, for any student in high school, a senior completing this, 90% of the time, you're going to be classified as a dependent student because you are dependent upon your parents, and their information as well as your information will be needed in order to complete the FAFSA. Now, there are some exceptions that would classify you as an independent student, such as once you're over 24 years of age, if you're married, if you have a child that you support, if you're in the military. But the main distinctions I want to point out and exceptions for a high school student who may be classified as an independent student, normally it's situations where perhaps you're in foster care or you are a student who has been identified as homeless. And in those situations, you don't have to provide the parent information. You would be classified automatically as an independent student. But for most of you, you would be defined as a dependent student, and both your information and your parents' information would need to be supplied. So I want to address the independent student topic because it's like, great, you know, you and your parents' information needs to be provided, but which parents? And there's lots of different scenarios and makeups of households. So we tried to bullet point these things for you. But before we jump into that, I want to reiterate again the points we talked about for an independent student. Again, you're independent if you're married, if you have a child that you support, or if you're in foster care, you're an emancipated minor, or again, an unaccompanied youth who is homeless. So as they proceed to the next slide, you're going to see where we talk about the parent information. How's that household makeup, and what information do you need to complete the FAFSA? So first, you would need Social Security numbers and information for the student. And the parent if they have one, but again, if a parent is a non-citizen, you would just list all zeros for the parent in that section. Go ahead and gather up the federal income tax information, W-2s, and documentation of earnings and incomes for both the student and the parent. You'll also want to capture bank statements, investment records, and things such as that, records of untaxed income. And then before you even start the FAFSA, which we'll explain, you're going to create an FSA ID for both the student and parent. And the FSA ID, in short, is an electronic signature that's been created for the student and an electronic signature that's been created for the parent. This helps expedite the processing of the FAFSA and speeds that up. But it's super important you keep up with this information because you'll use it every year for the FAFSA, and you'll also use it when you're applying for student loans and things like that. So remember that you have to have this information. Keep it in a safe place so that you have reference to it every year when you pull it out. Another key thing is only you should be creating that. I will tell you we have issues sometimes where students create it for the parent and then the sibling doesn't have access to it because they don't remember what. It is very explicit that the account should be created by the student and by the parent. So to create your FSA ID, you're going to go to this link here, or you can literally go to fsaid.ed.gov and initiate the process. Again, you need your date of birth, your Social Security numbers, your full legal name, your email and mailing address, and a phone number. You'll authenticate yourself. Once you put that information in, they will send you a 6-digit code to verify your phone number, and they'll also send you a 6-digit code to verify your email. Once you have authenticated that account, then that FSA user ID is ready to be used to complete the FAFSA. And part of that process is answering challenge questions. So you'll go in and identify some security questions, so if you ever get locked out in the future, you're able to manage that just like any other account with a forgot username, forgot password feature. But it is super important that you do remember the step of verifying the account. If you create it but don't wait for that 6-digit text or 6-digit email to authenticate the account, you won't be able to use that FSA ID as an electronic signature. So you're going to want to make sure you walk through that. And also just want to make note that for the parents, again, if you are a non-citizen, your child can still complete the FAFSA. They can create their FSA ID and have an electronic signature. A non-citizen parent would not be able to do this step, but you would be able to complete the FAFSA, and at the end, there's an option to print the page and mail it rather than doing it with an electronic signature. So the glaring question, whose information do you list? We talked about there's different types of households, and great, I'm an independent or a dependent student and I know I need to list my parents' information, but which parents' information do you have to list? So in short, you're going to list the parent information whom you live with. So your legal, biological, or adopted parents that you live with. So if they're married, both parents' information would be listed. In the event that you come from a separated household and maybe your parents are divorced, but your parents have remarried, it would be the parent whom you live with and their spouse, because it's the income of that house with your legal parent and the household income that's being listed if they're remarried. In situations where a parent is divorced, typically, if they're not living together, the divorce decree can indicate the parent that has primary custody. They would obviously be the one that would be used to complete the FAFSA. And always there's going to be exceptions and questions that you have, and so we'll answer those. Put those in the chat so we can come back and address your questions. But if you're in a situation where 50-50, you float between those families, you're really going to want to start to then look at who has legal custody, who supports you more than 51% of the time, things along those lines to determine which parent's information you're going to be listing. And we can go over those items as well. The final thing on that note is oftentimes also in divorce decrees, taxes can switch from year to year. Who gets to claim a child as to whether or not this year this parent claims and the next year the other parent claims. It doesn't matter so much who claims you on taxes. The main thing is which parent supplies more than 51% of the income, and oftentimes the parent you're using is the one receiving child support because they're the ones providing most of your care, they're in the home, and they're the ones that should be used. A major distinction I want to make here, because we do have students that are living with grandparents or an aunt or other guardians. You should never list anyone's income unless they are your legal parent and or legal, the spouse of your legal parent. So we want to make sure you understand that. You should not list a grandparent's information or anyone else's income for the parent section of this application.
Okay, thanks, Kaylee. Before we get to the questions from our audience, Alice, can you highlight the different types of financial aid there are, as well as scams to avoid for families as they go through the process?
Sure. The first type of financial aid is grants. And grants are what we call free money that do not have to be paid back. Scholarships, another type of free money. Students would apply to various organizations or the college's foundation for scholarships. And they're awarded not only based on GPA, there are scholarships that are awarded for a multitude of reasons. A lot of times people hesitate to apply for scholarships because they think their GPA is not high enough. And I just want to say that is not true. We have work study job. I mentioned that in my introduction. Federal work study funds can be paid to students who have done a FAFSA and are determined to be eligible for financial aid. These are jobs on campus. They might be in the Learning Support Center, tutoring, it might be in the library or front office somewhere, but students are able to work on campus, then go to their classes, then come back and maybe work another couple of hours. So it's a really great opportunity for students to work while they're in school. And then we have loans. Loans are borrowed money that a student has to pay back. And one myth that people believe is that if I don't get the job I wanted or I don't graduate, I don't have to pay the loans back. And that is not true. Federal student loans are like any other loans. If you borrow, you're signing a promissory note, you will have to pay those back. We do everything we can in the financial aid offices at colleges and universities to help people avoid large loan debt, but sometimes that's the only recourse for students. Brooke mentioned avoiding student aid scams, you always want to go to FAFSA.gov to do your FAFSA application. There are others that I won't mention because I don't want to put that in your head. Just know that, and maybe jot down, I need to go to FAFSA.gov only. That's the only place that you will fill out your application and not be charged. There are companies who will do that for you and charge you, and it's something that you could do yourself or the staff at the college or university can help you with. So we like to let people know ahead of time before they start doing that because we can't get your money back. I think they're charging over $100 per FAFSA now, the last I heard. So please look for the .gov website. You never have to pay for scholarship applications, financial aid applications, and that's why the title of the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. You never have to provide a credit card. If ever you're filling out anything related to money for college, such as scholarships, if you're not comfortable with the information that they're asking for, just don't give it. Stop and contact your financial aid office.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, ladies. I do know that this is a lot of information, and I do want to remind everyone that we are recording this session, and all the materials will be available on our website, pcsb.org/FAFSA. So we're now going to get started with some of our questions. I'm going to turn this first question back to you, Alice, because it's something you talked about with regarding work study. So the question is, if you answer yes to be considered for work study, but then don't end up getting a work study position, does this impact your aid in a negative way? Asked in another way, do you lose out on being considered for other aid or more aid because of the amount of work study money that you were offered but declined?
That's a very good, complicated question to start. When a student answers that question on the FAFSA, some colleges and universities actually do offer federal work study funds based on the student's response to that. And in that case, those work study funds, yes, are taking up space in the unmet need, using up the unmet need that perhaps loans could fill or scholarships. So I would say it depends on the school you're going to. I know for sure at USF, well, I believe I know for sure, unless this has changed, USF is a school that will offer you work study and ask you to accept or decline, and then they have a process for a student to find a job. SPC, it's the opposite. The student does the FAFSA. If they're interested in applying for student employment, we have a process in place. So you really have to talk to the college or university you're going to find out how that works. Unfortunately, I can't speak for the other schools, but it does become part of your financial aid package. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn this over to you, Kaylee. This is more of a troubleshooting question, it sounds like. Why won't my FAFSA link to my parents' IRS information?
That's actually a really common problem. So the key is, in order for it to link to your parents' information, the name listed when you log into the IRS site and you're inputting that information for it to link, it has to match exactly how it is on your parents' 1040 tax return. I have seen it times where it's as simple as if Avenue is spelled out, you need to make sure it says Avenue.
Yes.
Likewise, you need to make sure your parents' legal name is listed on that exactly the way it is on the tax return. And then a common thing is I've worked with students or parents before, and they've indicated that they filed married separately, but in fact they filed married joint returns. So you also have to make sure that the filing status when you're trying to link it matches exactly how it was done with the IRS website. So those things are super important to make sure that those things all identically match what's on the 1040 for the year that you are attempting to link it with.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question I'll answer is, what if I don't what if I don't want to have student loans, but I want scholarships? Well, first of all, that's a wise thing to want to do. We want to get free money as much as possible, which is what scholarships are. In addition, grants that you also can earn through the FAFSA are also what we consider free money, and that they don't have to be paid back. What I will say with regards to that is if you complete the FAFSA, there are some state scholarships that are available that require the FAFSA, as well as some of the scholarships at the colleges. So colleges want to see that you have tried to get as much money as possible. So even if you would complete the FAFSA and not be eligible for grants and such, the scholarship committee might want to see that before they're going to grant you a scholarship. So that's still the first step. I also want to say, if you get a financial aid package and it includes it includes loans, you can decline those. So those are not something that you have to, if you get a financial aid package, you can choose not to accept those, or accept some or not all. So definitely be on the lookout for scholarships and make sure to apply for those as needed. But the FAFSA is still a big part of doing that as well.
And I want to just overemphasize that point. If you don't complete a FAFSA, you're basically saying to the college that you can cover that cost of schooling, that you don't need any financial aid to help pay for it. So as you're looking at schools and cost is a concern, by not doing the FAFSA, you're less likely to receive additional support from the university. So FAFSA helps you determine federal financial aid you may be able to receive, in some cases some state financial aid you may be receive, but it is also used by those colleges to determine money that the institution itself may award you. So while you don't want student loans, awesome, you don't have to take them, but everyone should do the FAFSA.
Great, thanks for re-emphasizing that. Alice, we'll take this, see if you can take this question. If my daughter is graduating in June, but not starting until after the summer, when should she apply for the FAFSA?
If they're graduating this June of 2021, they should now be completing the FAFSA for the I'm sorry, I get confused here, 21-22 academic year. That application opened up October 1, 2020. So if she's a senior graduating this year, she needs to do that FAFSA that we'll use starting next fall. So that would be now if you've not done it. If a student that's graduating in June wants to take classes in the summer, that summer, if it's an academic year, is the current year, they will not have been a high school graduate yet. So unless they take later summer classes that start in June after their high school graduation date, they wouldn't be eligible for the financial aid application. A lot of times people do that FAFSA regardless because it's good practice, but the 21-22 FAFSA is the one that your student as a senior now should be doing if their intention is to start college in the fall of 2021.
And I want to add on to that. So again, if you're a senior graduating, absolutely, you need to do the 21-22 FAFSA because you're looking to take classes in August. However, I actually encourage my seniors, all of them, to go ahead and do the 2021 FAFSA, because many universities will, when they're making admissions decisions, change your admission terms. So you might have applied to start in the fall, but they might accept you contingent upon you starting in the summer term. So if that happens, by having both your 2021 FAFSA and your 21-22 FAFSA completed, it will ensure that you can qualify for the maximum financial aid on the front end for the summer term. And the other reason I encourage families to look at that, if you have that opportunity to start in the summer, don't panic. It's actually a good thing because in Florida, you have to have 9 hours of summer school. So you get the most financial aid opportunity this summer to help you cover those costs. So every senior, I would encourage you to go ahead and do both FAFSAs that are open right now. But without a doubt, you have to do the 21-22 FAFSA for classes beginning August beyond.
Thank you. This kind of relates to that question, so I'll just tag on to there. The question is, do we have to wait until a student graduates to fill out the FAFSA form? It says that a student has to graduate or have a GED. My student will graduate in June. So as we've said, no, you will complete it now. It is before they would get the actual money released to them that they would need to be able to indicate that they've graduated or have a GED. But again, the earlier you get the FAFSA done, the more opportunities you have. And there are schools that you're applying to, you want to check for those priority deadlines as well. So the next question is, would the FAFSA ID we had for the student in grade school be the same, or do we have to create a new one?
So you should not have a FAFSA ID for the student from grade school. However, if you created, and I think you're talking about the electronic signature, the FSA ID. So if you created an electronic signature before as the parent, and that FSA ID could have been created for you as the parent and you were a student at the time in college, or you could have created an FSA ID as a parent and been using it for another child who was applying for financial aid. You only create one FSA ID and you will always use that as your electronic signature. So once it's been created, you will use that whether you're applying for financial aid for yourself to go to college or, each individual child. It's the same FSA ID that you would use.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
There was a precursor to the FSA ID, used to be called the federal PIN. And we also had a FAFSA forecaster, which is kind of a tool for parents to maybe sophomore, junior, senior level to practice doing the FAFSA. It is possible that maybe an individual was part of some group when their child was in grade school, kind of college preparation material, that maybe they did a FAFSA forecaster and maybe they created a PIN. Or if it's a parent that might have done an application back, I'm thinking it's probably been close to 10 years now since we haven't had the PIN, but we have the FSA ID in its place. So I wonder if that might be what this person's asking.
But
Yeah.
even still, yes. So yes,
Yeah.
good clarification. It would be that FSA ID in that one account.
Yes.
So this is an easy one. Will this presentation be available after the meeting? And the answer is yes. We will have it posted on our website, pcsb.org/FAFSA. So you'll be able to look back on this and review again. So is there an income limit to qualify for grants? You want to take that,
Great
Kaylee?
question.
Oh.
Yeah, I was like,
We
Alice
get
as
that
well.
all the time. The most direct answer is no. People often want to know, well, how much or how little can I make and be eligible? It's not that simple. The EFC formula, expected family contribution, comes from the answers on the FAFSA application. It's a combination of income, marital status, dependence, and there's no magic way for any of us to say, oh, you make X number of dollars, here's your eligibility. It's far more complicated than that. If you have $1 million income every year, you're not going to be eligible for grants per se, but anybody can have an unsubsidized loan. Do you
So
have
with-
anything to add to that, Kaylee? What did I leave out?
Yeah, so the only thing I would say is I don't like for someone to think, oh, I shouldn't do it because of my income threshold,
Yeah.
because I want to go back to the point that we made that everyone should do the FAFSA, regardless
Yes.
of what your income situation may be, because while your income maybe eliminates you for qualifying for federal grants, although you would definitely have an entitlement for those Stafford loans, and it may, in some cases, even eliminate you from qualifying for some state grants. It very well, though, you may still be eligible for institutional grants. So the simplest way to understand that is colleges have a cost of attendance, and then you have an EFC, which stands for expected family contribution. So colleges, when they're determining how much need you have, they look at the cost of attendance. So let's say it's $30,000, and let's say your EFC is $10,000. Well, with an EFC of $10,000, you would only qualify for loans. However, you still have $20,000 of unmet need for that cost of school that would be outstanding. That's often where the institution may award money. So it's really important that you understand you should go ahead and do the FAFSA to get an idea of what that EFC is, because unless that EFC exceeds the cost of attendance at that college, there is a significant chance that you will receive some type of financial aid to help offset the cost.
And you could potentially be eligible for federal work study if you have that unmet need. A lot of times people think they must be Pell Grant eligible to qualify for federal work study, and that's not true. Her example of a $20,000 cost of attendance minus a $10,000 EFC leaves you $10,000 unmet need. Scholarships could fill that need, loans could fill that need, or federal work study.
Great, thank you. Okay, so our next question is regarding, I think, kind of about that independent dependency status. What if I'm still helping my daughter at least 51%, but she's not living at home or gone most of the time?
So you get into gray areas. So I
Yes.
would say it might be something that we would want to have a follow-up conversation, and you have an opportunity at the end of this. You can request actually on our website for someone to reach out to you, because there's lots of what if scenarios, and there would be additional follow-up questions that I would want to ask to best help determine who should be answering that FAFSA question. Ultimately, typically when it comes to the FAFSA, it's the household where the child is spending and living primarily. And what I heard you saying was that she's, not in your home primarily. So then really it should be the parent with whom she is living with primarily.
Okay, my parents don't have a Social Security number, but they have a tax ID number. What should I do?
Thank you so much for asking. So you would list your Social Security number, create your FSA ID, and do the FAFSA as the student. But for your parent, when it's asking for their Social Security number, you don't put their work ID there. Instead, you're going to enter all zeros for your parent's Social Security number. The rest of the information, you would list exactly how it is, their legal name, their date of birth, that type of information. But for the Social Security for your parent, if they do not have one, you're going to list all zeros. For both parent, you'll list all zeros for there. And the FAFSA will allow you to continue and complete it appropriately. You may not be able to link to the IRS since they don't have a Social Security number to do it. So you would have to manually enter that information off of your 1040. But if you need help with that, your school counselor may be able to help you. And again, on the web page that Ms. Pear will reference, you can always reach out and request some assistance in completing the FAFSA, since you'll have to manually type in the tax information for your parents.
And
Yeah,
you'll
I think a
also
good
have to print that student aid report, or FAFSA, and have your parents sign that FAFSA in lieu of the FSA user ID, and then you have to mail that in. So that process takes longer. You definitely want to do that, your FAFSA early, when you have to list parents with a 0 Social Security number. You cannot wait until June, and if you're hoping to get financial aid in August, and initiate that FAFSA. So do it now, please.
Okay, so this is another tax-related question. What if this is the first year that my parents are going to file taxes?
That's fine. You actually aren't required to even file taxes to do the FAFSA. So if you have your tax information, because you're supposed to file, you would use the parents' tax information. But if there is a year where your parents don't have to require taxes legally, on that question, it says, do I have my parents' tax information? There's a drop down that says already filed, will filed, or will not going to file. So they don't have to complete taxes in order to do the FAFSA. It is best if taxes are done and you're using that completed information when you apply for financial aid, rather than indicating they will file and do it. So an answer to your question, it doesn't matter if this is their first year doing taxes. You're able to proceed and get that completed without issues.
Thanks. So if we've already submitted the FAFSA form, can we go back and make edits, then resubmit? So after you complete the FAFSA, a few days later, you are going to get a student aid report, and that is where you're going to review and make any changes that you need to. So yes, there it is certainly possible, and that is one of the things you're supposed to do with your student aid report. You'll be able to review your expected family contribution and all of that information, but you also will be asked to review the information and make corrections if necessary.
And again, just a tip, these are great questions that are prompting tips of things that occur often. If you log back in to make a correction to your FAFSA, sometimes students log back in because they want to add a college or whatever it may be. Every time you make a change to that FAFSA, you need to make sure that you're submitting those electronic signatures again. Otherwise, it can sit out there as if it's incomplete. And if you add it into a school, it may not go to them. So when you make changes, you do have to submit those electronic signatures when you do so.
Good tip.
Point.
Okay, Alice, here's a question. I filled out the FAFSA. Both my and my child's info was submitted. Then we had to enter our W-2s later. What do I do now? How do I know if my child is eligible and for how much?
I'm wondering, when you say we had to enter our W-2s later, it was the FAFSA processed, and was it selected for verification? Did the school ask for tax documents and verification forms? I'm not sure. If I know at SBC, you have on the student portal, My SBC, there are checklist items. If we need something for verification or to complete your file, we have a checklist item, plus we send an email to you. If you are anticipating going to another school, you should definitely be speaking with someone in the financial aid office at that other school to find out what they need. Not really positive. If you can give me more information, I might be able to answer that a little better.
So what I would recommend is, if you check your email, there will actually be a confirmation email once your FAFSA is submitted. And on your student aid report, where it gives you the EFC, if your EFC lists a number and there's no star or asterisk next to it, then you should be good to go. So as long as everything on that SAR is correct and the colleges you needed your FAFSA sent to are listed, and that EFC doesn't have a star next to it, in terms of your FAFSA step, you should be good to go. So glance at that student aid report. And if your EFC on that report has a little star next to it, that is your blazing red flag that,
Right.
hey, there's an issue with your FAFSA. And what that means is every college on that FAFSA is going to need some follow-up information from you. And so, as Alice had suggested, you need to log into your account for each college to check that financial aid status. And that can be a little overwhelming for students. Condition your kids to start checking their emails and logging into their accounts at those schools. And so I explained that. For example, students in our district have Focus, and they're used to logging in and checking their status there. Every respective college has their own portal. For example, at University of South Florida, it's called the Oasis account. So they would need to log into that. That's where they can check their admission status, but that's also where they can check their financial aid status. If you were selected for verification, either because you found that in a college account or you see a star next to your EFC number, then that means every college that FAFSA went to, you would need to complete that verification process with.
Okay, great. So the next question is, how do I research state assistance? So I'll cover that a little bit. So there is a website. The Office of Student Financial Aid has a website that has information on their state grants and scholarship programs. It's a long address. So what my suggestion for you to do is to go to, I'm going to give you another financial aid page that we have on the PCSB website, and that is pcsb.org/financial aid. So that's going to take you to our general financial aid page where we have information on scholarships, we have links to the Bright Futures program, and we have links to the state scholarship and grant programs. So if you, that would probably be my easiest suggestion is to go to there and click on that, and what you'll find is a list of the programs that they offer and on the side, and you'll be able to click on them, and they will give you additional detail, including what is required, what you have to complete for that particular scholarship or grant. So some of them are going to say that you have to complete the FAFSA. Some of them are going to say you might have to complete the Florida Financial Aid application. We've got the website up there so you can see it right now. And so either of those, you'll be able to see. Some of them actually require both, and some of them might say you need to check with the college that you're planning to attend. But if you go to that website, that's also, like I said, there's also the link for the Florida Financial Aid application, which is required for some of the scholarship and grants programs, such as the Bright Futures program. So this is kind of going back, just some clarification. Is the FAFSA approval money a grant or a loan? Anyone want to?
Well, it depends. When you do a FAFSA, you get a student aid report. The student aid report gives you an expected family contribution number. That expected family contribution number tells us if you are Pell eligible or not. And if you are not, then the school starts awarding other grants that you may qualify for, and they may offer loans and they may offer federal work study. So the FAFSA itself is not a Pell application as much as it's a financial aid, all types of financial aid application. So that's why it depends. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And this one might be one you want to answer too, because it is, how would FAFSA help when trying to transfer schools in the future, i.e. SPC to St. Leo? Alice, you want to give that one a try?
How does FAFSA help? Let me try by saying if you start at a SPC or any school and then you're going to transfer later, especially if it's a mid-year, you would need to tell the school that you're leaving that you do not want the spring aid, for example, because you will be transferring to another school. And then we would tell you to be sure that you've added the new school to your FAFSA application so that they'll get the student aid report electronically, and then they can process and offer you any financial aid. So the first school doesn't necessarily connect to the second school, but you can talk to us at any school and we would say exactly that. If we awarded you projected aid for fall, spring, and you're telling me that you will not stay here in the spring, you'll go to St. Leo, I would say you need to speak with St. Leo about your projected financial aid for the spring, but they're also going to need to know that it's canceled, that your aid is canceled at the first school. Two schools cannot award financial aid to a student at the same time. So if one does and somehow that gets bypassed, then you're going to end up having a problem where aid has to be paid back. So it's always best to, in advance, at least 2 to 3 months in advance, speak to the other school, add that school to your FAFSA, talk to their financial aid office, and then let the first school know that you'll no longer be attending. Let the financial aid office know that you'll no longer be attending.
Another thing to consider is you do the FAFSA every year. So you're going to do the FAFSA now, and then you're going to next October renew your FAFSA for the next year. So if you were going to SPC and then transferring after 2 years, the FAFSA wouldn't really necessarily connect because you're renewing the FAFSA every year for the next school year. And that's why your financial aid could change based upon circumstances. As Alice was saying, if you're transferring in the middle of a year, it's important for you to know that your financial aid award at SPC could be different than your financial aid award, say, at St. Leo in this example. So the only financial aid that you would be guaranteed to remain the same, assuming you were still a full-time student at both places would be your student loan eligibility and your Pell Grant eligibility. But the rest of your financial aid is subject to change when you were to transfer those schools. But your Pell Grant and your student loan are entitlements, and they're awarded based upon how many hours you're registered for. So just know that depending upon when you transfer, you would need to communicate that to the college you're leaving, and then you have to renew your FAFSA every year.
Okay, thanks. If my son has a 529 plan, will this affect his financial aid?
Alice,
There is a question on the FAFSA in the income section. So it's going to depend if the 529 plan is in the student's name or the parents' or grandparents' name. When you get to the income section of the FAFSA, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact page number or line number. I was just looking at that the other day, but there's a very specific question there that's going to lead you to answer that question, whether you have to include it as part of assets or not.
Great, thank you. Should we complete the FAFSA if our daughter is going to St. Pete College and we will be paying out of pocket?
My advice would be yes. You should complete the FAFSA, even if you intend to pay out of pocket. And I might just say this: maybe you don't qualify for, certain grants, but on the student loans, you might qualify for a subsidized student loan. And so that's important to know a distinction. There are subsidized student loans, which means while the student's enrolled in school, the government's paying the interest on that student loan, and there's no payments while they're in school. Unsubsidized, there's interest accruing. So I kind of equate that to parents sometimes when they're like, I'm not doing student loans. I'm like, well, would you do rooms to go, no interest financing for 3 years? Because if you say yes to that, then maybe you should consider a subsidized loan and do no interest financing for 3 years or 2 years while your kid's in school. So I would say, yes, you should do the FAFSA because you never know what type of financial aid may be awarded, and that's money then you could keep in your pocket.
And yes, you should do the FAFSA at SBC. Our development foundation awards scholarships 3 times a year, and students don't have to be financially eligible in the way of Pell, and they don't have to take loans, but they could qualify for scholarships. And if the scholarship is determined to be need-based, the only way they can determine a student's need is by the student having done the FAFSA so that they have an EFC number, which we put in that calculation. Cost of attendance minus EFC gives us unmet need. And that's where a scholarship would fit in. So the only way I would say no to that is if you absolutely don't ever want your student to potentially get any scholarships, because again, you don't have to take out loans. And maybe you decide that you want them to get some experience working and they want to do a federal work study job on campus. They must have a FAFSA completed for that. It doesn't hurt, it's free, it doesn't take long. We can help you if you need help, but your decision.
Yes, hopefully you all are kind of recognizing a theme tonight, which is complete the FAFSA. And then
Yes.
so pretty much that question
Yes.
comes up. I think you're going to find that there's going to be most situations we're going to tell you to do that. Kaylee, this I think you had referenced earlier. Can you please go back and explain the 9 hours of summer school?
With our state university systems, so our Florida State, UF, UCF, USF, those schools throughout the system, we actually, in order to have your degree conferred, there is a requirement that 9 hours are completed throughout summer school at some point during that program of study. That's something that your academic advisors can better explain at those colleges. But that's kind of my point when a kid says to me, I applied for the fall, but I got accepted in the summer. I really wanted to start in the fall. Honestly, that's where the blessing comes in, because you have a FAFSA you can do for this summer, so you have a lot more financial aid available to you since you weren't using any financial aid this fall or spring. So it can help cover those summer costs this year. Because your FAFSA runs for a fiscal year. It can be, you know, the fall, spring, summer term, and which is most common. Sometimes colleges, it starts with the summer term. But there is a requirement to graduate from a Florida public state university system that as students do at some point have to earn at least 9 hours in summer school.
Great, thank you. I'll answer this. Can you apply for the FAFSA in 11th grade? So if you were going to graduate early, then yes, potentially. So if you were going, if it's a 11th grader that's going to graduate at the end of 11th grade and start school the next year, then you would do that. What we're looking at is when you complete the FAFSA, you are doing it for the next school year. As we mentioned, if it's in the summer, then it would be, that is considered like the tail end of the year. But in general, there would not be a reason to complete the FAFSA as an 11th grader if you weren't going to be starting school until, so for right now, if you were going to start school in fall of 2022, yes, I said that right,
Yes.
then you're going to wait until October of your senior year to complete.
I'd like to just tack on to that.
Sure.
I'm thinking it might be the reason for the question. We have students who can be early college, dual enrollment, and we also have students in collegiate high school. So sometimes when the students are in those programs, they want to apply for financial aid. But the requirement for federal financial aid that a student have a high school transcript already precludes that. So we do have students that are asking about financial aid, but because they're early college, dual enrollment, or collegiate high school, they are not eligible. So if the person in 11th grade that's asking the question, it falls into one of those categories, you can do the FAFSA, but you will not receive financial aid.
Okay.
You can do it for practice.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. So here's a question. We received information that our FAFSA was completed, but the college is not seeing that we have completed, and they've done this in October.
So that
Did you-
actually can vary by the college. Some colleges pull down FAFSAs based upon their accepted students. So until you've received an acceptance from that college, they just maybe have not retrieved down the FAFSA to match that up. So that very well could be a likelihood. The other thing could be that, for example, you applied in the fall, but the college went ahead and granted you acceptance starting in the summer term. In that situation, you may have done the FAFSA for the 21-22 school year, which is correct if you were starting in the fall and you need to do it for the fall. But if they've since accepted you for the summer term, you also would need to do the 2021 FAFSA. So there's a few different scenarios for that, but for many colleges, you have to be accepted before the FAFSA will match up. And then the next thing is to make sure that the term for which you were accepted, you've completed that FAFSA for the appropriate term as well.
And I'd also add, you also just want to make sure, look on your FAFSA and make sure that you listed that school as one of the schools to receive your FAFSA. So those would be kind of some troubleshooting things to do. Again, if you do those things and are still running into trouble, when we get to the end, I think we're going to pull up what is the FAFSA website, and you're going to see at the top there is a submit a question or set up an appointment. So you could do that, and we can give you more individualized instruction. How do you add a student if you've already completed a FAFSA okay, we've got that website up there just so you can see it right now, and that blue part is where you would submit your question. So I will respond to this. How do you add a student if you've already completed a FAFSA for an older child? So if it's actually already been completed and submitted, you are going to have to do a separate FAFSA from scratch. I believe I'll let anyone chime in if I'm saying that incorrectly.
Yes.
For your other child. However, if you haven't started one, when you're doing the FAFSA and you get to the end, right before you hit submit, it will ask if you want to transfer this information to an additional FAFSA. And so at that point, you could click on that and transfer over the parent information. I don't believe if it's already been submitted, there's any way to do that if anybody.
No, after it's submitted, you can't, but the main distinction is to know that each individual student needs to apply for financial aid and do the FAFSA. So if you've already done it for one child for that academic year, then the other child would have to initiate the process, create their FSA ID, and log in to the FAFSA account. They would complete the student information, and then your parent information would go on that child's account as well. So each individual student would have to complete the FAFSA, and after it's submitted, you can't, submit that over to another account. So each individual child does a FAFSA.
Okay, if my son gets accepted for the SOS program for the summer of 2021, is that completely free, or will the FAFSA apply for that too? Is that a St. Pete
The
College?
Summer
Yeah,
of
the Summer of
Success at
Success
SPC,
program,
I
Alice.
believe. Summer of Success.
Yes, if you
That
can
is
address
a
that.
program. Tuition and textbooks are provided by the college at no cost to the student.
And students for that program, are they eligible to apply for financial aid if they wanted to do
They
so?
are. They
So-
are. But they would have to do a 2021 FAFSA, and they would have to graduate before the start date of their classes in the Summer of Success program.
Correct. So the cost is
Yes.
fully covered by SPC for the Summer of
Yes.
Success. However, a student could complete the FAFSA for the summer. So if they had other entitlements, such as the Pell Grant, that's actually refund money
Potentially.
depending upon how many hours and all of that type of stuff. You may very well get, be able to have some financial aid available to you as well. So you can go ahead and apply for financial aid for the summer, but the cost for that program is covered by SPC.
Okay, thanks. So since they're going off old taxes, but since then I've filed Chapter 7, so funds are much different. How is this handled? So this is going to be a professional judgment, and Alice, would you like to kind of go over
Sure.
what a professional judgment is and how that would be handled?
I was waiting for someone to ask this.
I was too.
So on the current year, 2020-21 FAFSA, we asked for 2018 tax information. Well, the federal government did. So on 21-22, they'll be asking for 2019 income. So let's say someone fills out the 21-22 in 2019, they had a severe decrease in income, then they would talk to a financial aid counselor about a potential change in circumstances. So we would typically need documentation, which would be tax return for 2018, tax return for 2019. We have a professional judgment form that we ask you to fill out, explain the change in circumstances, provide the documentation, showing us on taxes the difference in income. As a financial aid counselor, I could then go in and change the numbers on the FAFSA, mark it as a professional judgment, EFC adjustment, and resubmit it and have it recalculated, and then the eligibility comes out different. Same thing with if right now we are making changes sometimes for students who in 2020 had a change of income. Now that we are in 21, we are waiting for 2020 taxes to be filed before we actually make that adjustment. But we could look at both of those years. And we always can do that. Like the subsequent year, if you reported 2019, if your 2020 was less, you can reach back to a financial aid counselor. They're the only ones that have the ability to make that change. If you make that change yourself, you'll probably get selected for verification. Your FAFSA would be marked as incorrect, but we do have a process to help you with that.
So to make that less confusing, you go ahead and do the FAFSA with the correct information you have. If it's 2019 taxes, you use that. And then you would reach out to the college and they can do that professional judgment. You would not adjust your income on the FAFSA yourself.
If a student is a teen parent, meaning they have their own child and both student and their child live under the parent's roof, the student's parent roof, do they apply as a student with a dependent and leave their parent information off the FAFSA form?
That's a good question. So if the student with the child is living with the parent, from our perspective, unless they can show that they're earning, I don't know, I'm just picking at a number, $25,000 versus earning $1,500 a year. the circumstance of the student living with the parents, unless they can provide documentation to show us otherwise, we would consider the student and their child to be dependent on the parent. But as always, there's unique circumstances. So that would be a conversation to have with a financial aid counselor. If the student with a child was living with a boyfriend or someone else, another family member, then they would potentially be considered an independent student. But again, we're looking for documentation of how you're providing support for yourself and your child.
And
If
actually, the
your
FAFSA
mother
will
and
address-
father are actually supporting you, you're dependent. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the FAFSA will actually address that. So the question on the FAFSA very explicitly says, do you have a dependent or child whom you support, 51% or more that you
More,
cover their
yes.
expenses? So you very well could have a child be living with your parents, but you could be working and help paying bills. You could be covering all of the child's expenses and formula and whatever it may be. So if you can answer that question that you have a dependent and you are supplying more than half that child's support, when you answer yes to that question, it automatically will switch you over as an independent student. So you would not supply parent information. Now, if you're FAFSA selected for verification, then you might have to provide to the college additional information or judgmental stuff so they can authenticate that. But really it comes down to how do you answer that question on the FAFSA. So if you read the question and you have a child, but you go, no, I don't really pay and cover more than half its expenses because my parents pay for everything, then you would answer it no, and that would make you a dependent of your parent. So the response to that question is what determines whether or not you list parent information or do not.
Okay, we got quite a few more to get through, so I'm going to keep going. What if the student is eligible for free tuition scholarships through the state of Florida, which covers tuition and fees but not books, etc.? Do you still fill out the FAFSA? I think
Yes.
that you are going to
Sorry.
know that our answer is yes.
Yes.
We want you to continue to fill out the FAFSA. We want you to have a complete financial package. As you mentioned, you still have books. There's all other expenses. So yes, still complete the FAFSA. We received our FAFSA breakdown from the college, and it was also mailed to us. We still have a balance that we owe. My question is, will that be the final breakdown? So is this a final, would schools be giving out the final list of financial packages?
So it depends upon the college. It can
Yes.
vary. That's hard to say. But if you're looking at a financial aid award that already includes your subsidized or unsubsidized student loans, that's pretty much their official and final financial aid offer. However, that word final is like buying a car. Like, is the sticker price really the final price? There is nothing preventing you from saying to that college, hey, this is where I really want to be. I see this financial aid award, and this says I still owe $10,000. That's really not feasible. Is there something more you can do? And sometimes they come back and they were able to find another $1,000 grant, or they might be able to tell you, here's some endowment scholarships you can apply for. So typically that official award letter, if it has student loans, is their official offer, but it could change if you talk to them and inquire about other endowment opportunities and things along those lines. You have more negotiating rooms at private colleges. They tend to, magically come up with more money if you let them know you really want to be there. Whereas, example, at SPC, they might be a little more limited in what they have available. But colleges do have some money that's awarded to them from the federal government to award at their discretion. So, for example, the Pell Grant is an entitlement. If you qualify for the Pell, it is yours. However, colleges are also given what's called the SEOG grant, or Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. And the federal government may say to this school, hey, here's $1 million of this money to award how you see fit. Some colleges put all that money out on the front. Others kind of hold it back and allow students to self-identify. So when you get that award and you kind of see where you're at, do not hesitate to inquire, is there some other opportunities? Here's what we can afford, because they may very well be able to make some additional adjustments.
As Kaylee said, SBC and other state colleges, HCC, any community college, they don't typically have those funds that private universities and state universities have. We don't have all that extra money so much. At SBC, the SEOG grant goes to students who have a 0 expected family contribution, which is maximum Pell eligibility. And to give that to students as many as possible, it's a small award. It doesn't even compare to the Pell Award. So I think the Pell Award for a year is 6,000, and an SEOG at SPC would be 400, possibly 600 if you got in the spring, summer also, fall, spring, and summer.
And that's a great
So
example.
you have that bargaining ability at anything but a state college for the most part.
Right.
Okay, so this one, I think we've had a similar answer, a similar question, the same answer. If I've already bought the Florida prepaid plan for my student, should we still complete the FAFSA?
Yes.
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 You could, I think one thing is sometimes people think that if I have Bright Futures, I can't do FAFSA. If I have VA benefits, I can't do the FAFSA and get federal aid. If I have a Florida prepaid, and that is not true. You can also and should also complete the FAFSA. And you might want scholarships. You might find yourself in a situation where you need to take a small subsidized loan to stay in school, to, your transportation expenses or something. So yes, you can have the Florida prepaid, Bright Futures, VA, and still apply for the FAFSA. Yes.
So
You should
maybe if
always
nothing else,
complete the FAFSA.
we simplify absolutely, without a doubt, unquestionable. The very first year your child's going to college, you should do the FAFSA because you have no idea. But if your income doesn't change from year to year and it's the same and your child's at the same school and you didn't take any financial aid, maybe you don't do the FAFSA the next year. But if your child's going to college for the first time, absolutely, this first year at a minimum, do the FAFSA so you see what you're eligible for and what, not just federally, but from the college as well, because you don't want to miss out on those things.
Okay. Thank you for this great information. Where can parents and students get this information available in Spanish? Well, I'm glad this question was asked tonight because we are going to be, not myself, but some of my Spanish-speaking coworkers are going to be doing this presentation next week on February 3rd at 7 p.m. So we will have additional information, of course, about that, but the actual presentation will be in Spanish and the PowerPoint and so forth. So you'll want to tune in next week on February 3rd for that.
And the FAFSA is available in Spanish on the FAFSA.gov website.
Oh, great point. Thank you.
SBC has for the last few years done several events with the Hispanic Outreach Organization in downtown Clearwater. And although I don't speak Spanish, I've been able to take people with me who do, and we kind of do a translation kind of thing. But I was informed about that February 3rd event also. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Brooke.
Yeah, great. So here's a question. Why are the colleges and even College Board still asking for financial information even though we filled out the FAFSA?
So that can vary. So let's start first with colleges. Most colleges aren't going to ask financial information outside of the FAFSA. However, if your child's applying to more selective schools and your Ivy schools, some of those schools will ask you to also to complete a separate profile called the, just left me? I want to say CSS. Profile, and that profile gets much more in depth than the FAFSA. It will ask you your actual expenses, your mortgage payments, debts you have, and it takes in a much more holistic view of your income and your debts. And the reason those colleges do it is they have a philosophy. If they admit a student, then they're going to ensure that student can afford to be there, which means all of their expenses are going to be covered. So they're looking to see how much can you really afford to pay for this child to be at school so that they can fully meet that need before they accept you. So that's the most common thing. If colleges are looking for that financial information outside of the FAFSA, it may be on that profile you're referencing. For College Board, Oftentimes, that financial information is being used to determine if you are eligible for application fee waivers that they provide, as well as like SAT waivers and things along those lines, so that you don't have to pay to take those tests or maybe send your scores to the college. And the College Board does not have access to the information that is supplied on your FAFSA. So hopefully that addresses that question.
Great. So we've got 2 more questions left. I do have just a little announcement. Our superintendent, Dr. Grago, has been watching our event tonight, and he wants to thank all the parents and students watching, and also is grateful for our panelists tonight for putting this session together. Also wanted to remind that we are going to have upcoming sessions that we'll be doing in February, March, and April that will go over like the next steps that you should be taking after you get the FAFSA completed. I do have 2 more quick questions, though. How do we know whether a rental property should be listed as an investment asset or a business farm asset?
The FAFSA application in the income section very explicitly goes into those kind of questions. And again, that's in that income section that I said earlier. I can't remember the exact line number, but if someone has a specific question, they can reach out to me. I'd be happy to go over that with them and try to help. That would be in either the parent or the student, probably more likely the parent income section. After they file the taxes, it starts to talk about untaxed income and other sources of income. And that's where you would see that.
And you can also submit that question on our website if you have that.
Yes.
For farm income, you don't have to list it unless there's over 100 employees. Typically, your rental home is going to be that of a home, so it's going to be under your real estate investment portion of the question.
Final question, and then we're going to get to some closing remarks. I thought the FAFSA was a Pell Grant, so is it different? Possibly would that info be above at the financial aid link? So the Pell Grant is something that students can be eligible by completing the FAFSA, but not the only thing. So that is one type of grant. It's one of the big ones. So that's why sometimes, at least it used to be, sometimes they would say the Pell Grant application back in the day. But so you're on the same wavelength, but there are, as we said, there's other grants available, there's other scholarships available, as well as loans. Anybody want to chime in before we get to the ending?
That's very common that people call the FAFSA the Pell Grant application. You certainly don't get a Pell Grant if you've not done the FAFSA, but the Pell Grant is not the only thing that you could look to receive by doing the FAFSA. Free application for federal student aid. The starting point, we would award Pell if you had scholarships that were need-based, if you had work study, if you chose to take loans. All of that comes from you having done the FAFSA and receiving a student aid report.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank both Alice and Kaylee for their assistance tonight, and thank everyone who tuned in. I hope that you found this information helpful. I know that when you complete the FAFSA, you are likely going to come up with additional questions, so we do have a list of resources on the screen coming up where you can get additional help. And also, if you go to our website, pcsb.org/FAFSA, it's on the bottom of the screen, you will find links to all the resources. So that's kind of our one-stop page that we'd like you to go to get help. But you can see on the screen right now, we have a lot of resources with Pinellas County and just around the county in general, and state and federal, that you can to get help with FAFSA, because we know it's an important step for students to take. So if you do have questions, like I said, you can go to our website, which is on the screen again, pcsb.org/FAFSA, and you can make an appointment on a button to talk to someone about financial aid. You can see that there. It's that blue button right in the middle. I also want to mention that we do have some upcoming events, just to put them on your radar. As I mentioned earlier, next week, I don't have this one listed, but next week we are going to have our this in Spanish. And then on February 17th, we're going to have our second session in the FAFSA workshop session where we're going to tell you what to do after you've completed the FAFSA. And finally, there are some virtual FAFSA nights that are going to be coming up through SPC. They're going to be offering those on February 18th, 25th, and March 25th. And this is an opportunity for you to get on the computer, sit down with all your information, complete the FAFSA, and be linked to the experts at SPC's Financial Aid Office that will be able to assist you with that process. So thank you again for tuning in tonight, and I hope you found this enjoyable.